1 second you could be just fine, just walking into the office to start the day. The next second you could be on your knees, clutching your neck, scrabbling at the walls for a way out. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but it's not a predicament I wish on anyone. Something felt off this morning. I initially chalked up the odd atmosphere to the Monday blues, but when no one returned my friendly "good morning," I knew something must be really off. They all looked at me with such pity and a hint of derision. It was when I stepped into my cubicle that I felt a tightening in my chest. I dropped my bag on the floor, stumbling into my chair as I felt that shortness of breath. "Something's wrong," I choked out, coughing, falling out of my chair to collide with a cubicle wall. My cube neighbor that I shared a wall with popped his head over it, looking down at me blankly. My pleas for help fell on deaf ears as he simply blinked and walked away, leaving me to suffocate in a room full of air. A quiet clack behind me confirmed that my cubicle door had been shut. I didn't even know they could be locked. And no matter how many times I threw myself against it, it refused to open. I beat at the walls with weakening fists, scratching with nails that cracked and bled, looking for a way out that would never come. The inability to take a full breath was suffocating me, and my vision started to blur. The last thing I remembered was the staring from my co-workers, mixed with relief and trepidation. One of them tried and failed to stifle a cough, but everyone else had already turned their pitying gazes on them. Martha had always been meticulous. Her garden was a testament to her precision, each flower bed a masterpiece of color and symmetry. Every morning, she would sip her coffee and gaze out the window, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the dewy grass. It was her sanctuary, the only place where she felt truly at peace. But today, as she stood in the garden, the tranquility was shattered. She was not alone. Her husband, Richard, lay sprawled on the ground, his face twisted in a grotesque mask of pain. He had been dead for hours, the poison having done its job swiftly and efficiently. Martha knelt beside him, her hands trembling slightly as she checked his pulse one last time. There was no need, of course. She knew he was gone. Still, she had to be certain. Satisfied, she stood up and smoothed her dress, taking a deep breath to steady herself. It had all been so simple, really. Richard's heart medication was easy to tamper with, and he had never suspected a thing. Their friends would be shocked, of course, but they would all believe it was a tragic accident. Richard had always been so careless with his pills. The hardest part had been pretending to care. For months, she had smiled and played the dutiful wife, all the while planning her escape. And now, finally, she was free. Or so she thought. As Martha turned to head back to the house, she felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see Richard's ghost rising from the ground. But there was nothing there, just the empty garden, the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. She shook her head, trying to dispel the unease that had settled over her. It was just her imagination, she told herself. She was nervous, that's all. It would pass. But it didn't pass. That night, as she lay in bed, she felt a presence in the room with her. She turned on the light, her heart pounding, but the room was empty. She tried to tell herself it was just her nerves, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The next morning, Martha found herself drawn to the garden again. She stood by Richard's grave, staring down at the freshly turned earth. She felt a strange compulsion to speak to him, to explain herself. "It had to be done," she whispered. "You know that, don't you? We were miserable together. I couldn't go on living like that." The garden was silent, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the wind. But Martha felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. She backed away from the grave, her breath coming in short gasps. That night, she dreamed of Richard. He was standing at the foot of the bed, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. He didn't say a word, but his silence was more terrifying than any accusation. When she woke, she was drenched in sweat. She knew she couldn't go on like this. She needed to get away, to start over somewhere new. Her lover, Jack, was waiting for her in a small cabin in the woods. It was their secret hideaway, a place where they had planned to begin their new life together. Martha packed her bags quickly, eager to leave the house and its ghosts behind. But as she drove through the night, the sense of unease grew stronger. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Richard's face staring back at her. The road seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness pressing in on all sides. When she finally reached the cabin, she felt a moment of relief. Jack was there, waiting for her with open arms. She collapsed into his embrace, feeling the tension drain from her body. But that night, as they lay in bed together, the dream came again. Richard was there, his eyes boring into hers. She woke with a start, her heart pounding. "What's wrong?" Jack murmured, half asleep. "Nothing," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just a bad dream." But the dreams didn't stop. Every night Richard was there, his silent presence growing more menacing with each passing day. Martha began to dread going to sleep, knowing he would be waiting for her. One night, she woke to find Jack sitting up in bed, staring at something in the corner of the room. "Do you see him?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Martha turned her head slowly, her heart in her throat. And there, in the shadows, stood Richard. His eyes were dark pits of anger and sorrow, his face twisted in a grotesque smile. Martha screamed, but no sound came out. She felt a cold hand on her shoulder, pulling her down into the darkness. She fought against it, but it was no use. The last thing she saw was Richard's face, inches from her own, his breath cold on her skin. When the police found them the next morning, they assumed it was a tragic murder-suicide. The bodies of Martha and Jack lay entwined on the bed, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. The room was undisturbed, save for a single flower from Martha's garden, placed gently on the pillow beside them. No one ever knew the truth about what happened that night. But in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world is still and the shadows stretch long and dark, some say you can still hear Martha's voice, whispering her regrets into the wind. I hacked my girlfriend's phone. I made a habit of hacking people ever since I was a kid. I started off small. I gained access to my principal's online wallet and ordered Xbox games until he had his account deleted. I thought, that'll show him for giving me detention. As I grew older, I got far better at gaining access to people's private data. That's precisely what I did with my girlfriend Linda. We had just started dating and were still in our honeymoon phase. Things couldn't have been better. Linda is actually married to an abusive drunkard, but that didn't bother me as she told me that she plans to leave him. I installed malware on Linda's phone. Can't be too careful these days, right? This malware would basically give me unrestricted access to her phone. She had texts from her husband, Carl. "Where the fuck are you? Have you been sneaking out again?" "Hey, honey. Sorry I'm having brunch with Mom. I'll be back soon. Love you," Linda replied. Linda and I had actually been screwing back at my place. This idiot had no clue. The next day, I had plans with Linda to sneak off and have a picnic far from her house. When she cancelled on me, I got suspicious. "Hey, sorry I can't make it to our date today. I'm up to my nose in paperwork here at the office. We'll reschedule, yeah?" I checked her office CCTV footage. She wasn't there. She was lying to me. A notification popped up on my phone. A text message received on Linda's phone from David. "Hey, hot stuff. Come on out. I'm waiting outside. Can't wait to be inside you tonight." Who the fuck was David? "I'm coming, babe. I had to jump through hoops just to see you. My ex is being pathetic and clingy. I'm just so excited to finally be with you." Linda replied. "I'm her fucking ex now? That bitch is cheating on me. Oh, I'll fucking show her." I knew exactly what I was going to do. I first started off by hacking David's phone. I searched through his gallery until I found a selfie between him and my Linda. Of course they took one. I downloaded it and made it Linda's profile picture on all her social media. I then messaged Carl from David's phone. "Hey cuckold, I'm fucking your wife. After 4 inches in, she feels fresh as a virgin." The final nail in the coffin was their location. I sent it to Carl and waited. I also broadcasted his phone's microphone to my speakers. I wanted to hear it go down. It didn't take long for Carl to show up. "You fucking whore. Gunshot. Who the fuck are you?" "I'm the cuckold, you son of a bitch." Gunshot. Gunshot. Gargled breathing. Body thuds. Police sirens. I sat and enjoyed Linda's dying plea to stop her husband from beating her senseless. That'll show that bitch to mess with me. I think my roommate is a cannibal. For context, I met Thomas when we were randomly assigned to be roommates our freshman year of college. Nothing seemed to be off with him back then. Yeah, he was out a lot and came back late at night, but I always figured he was just having fun with friends. It's not like I wasn't doing the same. We had 4 semesters of living on campus, 2 years. In that time, he never struck me as particularly eccentric. Maybe a few little things, like how he never put any food in our mini-fridge, but nothing that warranted genuine concern. It wasn't until we moved into an apartment that things started to become strange. I moved in about a week after he did, a few days before classes were going to start. I was supposed to come in at the same time, but my aunt died, and I needed to help my dad with some aftermath there. It would have kept me longer had the start of the semester not snuck up, but that's beside the point. We viewed the apartment together initially, and it was a pretty nice, cozy place. Not exactly modern, but sure as hell cheap enough to make it worth it without said price being shady. Neither of us were bothered. But when I was finally able to move in, the place looked worse for the wear somehow. Significant enough that I noticed immediately. The paint in some places had started chipping severely, something Thomas didn't even react to when I pointed out. The floors were mostly fine, but a few of the boards creaked particularly loud, which I hadn't noticed at our viewing. Again, enough that it bothered me, and still not enough for Thomas to give a damn about it. Then there was the fact that the lock to the remaining bedroom, mine, was broken. A problem not very easily fixable on a college budget. I asked Thomas about that one, making sure he actually answered me, but he just kind of shrugged it off and told me he hadn't noticed it. But still, okay, whatever. Weird, but probably not a big deal besides losing our security deposit. It didn't matter. The semester started, and the weeks progressed. And that was when I started noticing things about Thomas. Living in an apartment instead of a dorm was the most distant he'd ever been. It's not like he was ever super talkative, but now it seemed like he'd only glance my way and move on, unwilling to do more. In fact, he only really talked to me if it was to snap at me about being clean or quiet. With the former, he was only a little bit of a clean freak back in our dorm. Incessant about his own side, but he only got really pressed about it if any of my mess seeped into his. Here and now, though, it really shined through how bad it was. He never touched my room or anything, but the rest of the apartment had to be spotless or he'd be pissed. A few times more recently, he's thrown out my stuff because I hadn't touched it in too long, whatever that means. Nothing devastating, but one of those things was a spare charger I had to dig out of the trash and then get sprayed down with Febreze for. Nothing short of annoying is what I'm getting at here. Why he suddenly became really anal about it was anyone's guess at that point. As for the being quiet part, that was an entirely new issue. Thomas never gave a damn if I was loud while playing a game before, but suddenly now it was worth slamming my door open without knocking over. I asked him to maybe be a little more polite about the issue when it came up, but I was again sort of just brushed off. Still, it rubbed me the wrong way how suddenly angry he was getting about the issue. Yes, it was my fault, and I got better about it. But what the hell was with the switch-up? Yet, I still just wrote it off. Maybe he had some mental or emotional stuff going on he didn't want to talk about. I could be patient with him. Sure. But it got worse. A roommate who clearly labels what food is his in the fridge is nothing to be mad about. Still, a few weeks into the year, I did a deep clean of the refrigerator. One that, to be fair, I had meant to do as soon as I moved in. But it was too late for that, and now I had to take everything out to scrub it down. Only a few things were his, most of them in the freezer. I took them out, setting them aside to clean it up quickly so nothing went bad. Probably no reason to worry about that, but whatever. Once I was done, I was checking over everything as I put it back in when I noticed something with his name on it had an especially pungent smell. It was awful enough that it made my nose instinctively wrinkle up. I put it back down, hastily shoving everything else back into the fridge before turning to it. Nothing really weird, just a piece of meat in tight saran wrap that looked to be still a little bloody. Frowning, I started unwrapping it to make sure Thomas hadn't put rotten meat in the freezer. The odor only got more foul as I did. It was a smell difficult to describe. Though it was what I was worried about, it didn't smell like rotting meat. It just smelled like death. Before I actually unwrapped the whole thing, it had a lot of layers, something I only questioned after the fact. Thomas came home and stopped dead in the doorway. "Why are you touching my shit?" He stormed over after a second, snatching the meat off the table and immediately starting to rewrap it. His hands were shaking. "It smells disgusting, man," I told him, stepping back a little. I wanted to check it wasn't rotten. "It's not. I'm on a diet," he snapped. "Don't take my food." "I wasn't taking it," I hissed back. "Don't touch it." Thomas stuffed the meat back into the freezer at that, then swiftly retreated to his room, barely opening the door and sliding through, leaving me to scrub my hands of that horrible stench. It was then that I really got suspicious of Thomas. The other weird things layered onto that incident that made me start observing him closer. I wasn't trying to stalk my roommate by any means, but looking past the surface made me notice some more things. How half the creaking boards were in front of his room, how he always slipped into his room like he was hiding something in there, that most of his labeled food had that same disgusting odor of death when I checked. Well, sniff tested them. After the first time, I was a little scared to unwrap another one. Maybe it was stupid, but I'd read online somewhere that a reason for creaking floorboards could be that they had recently been lifted up. So another little investigation started, this one intentional. When Thomas left for class, I started checking under the boards, and it wasn't long before I turned up something. A handsaw. Off-putting thing to be hidden under my feet, to say the least. It looked pretty well worn. Clean, but used. Aside from the saw, lifting the board let me see a mysterious reddish-brown blotch stained into the underside of it. That was enough for me to put the board back and stop thinking about it for now. At least, until I could come up with a plan. I had a film major buddy, and I managed to convince him to let me use an old video camera of his for science. I hid it in a plant and aimed it at the door to Thomas's bedroom at leg level. Set up to stay at said friends for the night, and then let it play out. In hindsight, a mediocre video camera was a really shitty pick for this, but it did the job enough. I didn't get a live feed or anything, and I was left to wallow in anxiety the whole night. But when I got back while Thomas was out the next day, I could dig the camera out and watch what it showed me, after charging it anyway. It caught 8 hours of footage before dying. Most of it was nothing, which I sped through until Thomas was suddenly pulling up the floorboard. I jumped back and let the video play. Thomas walked into frame, emotionlessly kneeling down and yanking the floorboard up, pulling the handsaw out and putting it down again. He walked into his room, seemingly stowing it away, then left again for another hour or so. When he came back, there was a woman our age with him. They were talking quietly enough that the video camera didn't pick up the words, but I could make a guess what it was about. They disappeared into his bedroom, the lock clicking loudly. It remained quiet for another moment, before the worst, most horribly unsurprising sound met my ears, a woman's scream being cut short. I could barely watch the next 2 hours of footage, all that remained before the camera died. But I did. I sat there in horror, watching Thomas's legs walk between his bedroom, the kitchen, and the door over and over again, bringing things, wrapping up pieces of meat. At one point near the end, stopping to sit at the table and eat something. I could only guess what. I think typing this out has helped me process it a little, but Thomas is going to be home from his class soon. I'm kind of terrified to leave the room when he's here. I'm worried he knows that I've got him figured out, or at least under enough suspicion to warrant police involvement. I can't confront him. That's a horrible idea. But I think I hear his keys jingling, so I'm going to have to pass him if I want to go to the cops. Wish me luck. If there's no update, well, you know what happened to me. What an excellent day for an exorcism. The girl was tied to the bed when the priest got there. This was as much to protect herself as others, a fact confirmed by the bulky bandages covering her lower arms, evidence of a previously unsuccessful suicide attempt. There had been other attempts, he'd been told, many others. The priest had never known a possessed person to try so hard to take their own life. The figure on the bed opened its eyes. "Help me," she begged. Her voice had been made unnaturally deep and hoarse by the infernal screams her throat had been compelled to emit. "I will," the priest assured her. "Put your trust in God." The girl's body flinched at the mention of our Lord, a grim reminder of the fiend that lurked within her. The priest put on his robes and assembled his sacred items. This was a rite he had performed many times, and whilst it no longer daunted him, the gravity of the situation was never lost. Speaking in a clear voice, he demanded to speak to the entity that resided in the girl. The child let her head fall back onto the pillow, closing her eyes. "I'm so tired," she rasped. "The evil, it's relentless. I've never witnessed such darkness." "I know, my child," he said, "but you must let me speak to the demon inside you." The girl's eyes snapped open. "I am the demon, you fool," she snarled. "Do you think a teenage girl would sound like this?" The priest took an involuntary step back, confused. "What trickery is this?" he demanded. "There is none," replied the figure on the bed. "I am trapped in the girl, and she will not release me." "Your kind are known to lie," replied the priest more confidently. "I do not believe you." "I don't care anymore," replied the girl, although the gravelly quality of her voice now made the priest doubt who he was talking to. "Whether you believe me or not, just banish me from here. Send me back to hell. It is what you set out to do today, after all." The priest could not argue with this logic, but it seemed wrong to do what a demon wanted. He still wondered what the ruse was. "There is no artifice," said the demon, for now the priest was certain that was who spoke. "You cannot imagine the torment I have gone through, inhabiting this body. The things she has shown me. Many times I've tried to end her life, taking over her body when she sleeps, but I have failed on each occasion. So she keeps me here, tortures me, makes me her audience and her scapegoat. Now hurry, before she wakes." "Very well," said the priest uncertainly. "I will perform the ritual." Good luck?" "It is you who will need the luck once I'm gone," said the demon. "But thank you anyway." Suddenly more terrified than he had ever been, the priest began. For as long as I could remember, I had possessed the gift of sight. I could see things that others couldn't, glimpses of the future, hints of what was to come. And so, I had become a fortune teller, using my gift to help others find their way in life. But one day, something changed. It started out innocuously enough, a few customers here and there, all with the same vision for their future. Fire and smoke, destruction and chaos. It was a strange and unsettling pattern, but I tried not to think too much of it. As the days passed, however, the pattern grew more and more pronounced. Every customer who came to me had the same vision: a world consumed by flames, a future destroyed by fire. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, I began to realize that something was very wrong. There was a darkness creeping into the world, a force that was spreading like cancer and consuming everything in its path. I tried to warn people, to tell them of the danger that was coming, but no one would listen. They scoffed at me and dismissed me as a madwoman. And so, I retreated into myself, withdrawing from the world and the people in it. But the visions only grew stronger. They came to me in my dreams, in my waking moments, and even in the midst of my daily routines. Everywhere I turned, I saw the same thing: a world consumed by fire and smoke, a future destroyed by the darkness that was spreading like a plague. And then, one day, it happened. The sky turned red, the ground shook with the force of the flames. I watched in horror as the world burned around me, as the very fabric of reality was torn apart by the darkness that had consumed it. As the flames of the apocalypse consumed everything in their path, the vast majority of humanity was wiped out. Only a handful of individuals managed to survive the cataclysmic event. And as I stood there, alone in the midst of the burning ruins, I realized that my gift had been a curse all along. I had seen the future, but I had been powerless to change it. And now, as the world burned around me, I knew that there was no going back. In the aftermath of the apocalypse, I wandered the desolate ruins of what was once a thriving civilization. The world was unrecognizable, a barren wasteland devoid of life and hope. I was among the very last humans alive, damned to bear witness to the world that once was. As I roamed the empty streets and charred remains of buildings, I thought back to the days when I had used my gift to help others. I had believed that I could make a difference, that I could use my abilities for good. But in the end, it had all been for naught. I had been powerless to stop the darkness that had consumed the world. My warnings had fallen on deaf ears, and now I was left to bear witness to the destruction that I had foreseen. In the days that followed, I struggled to come to terms with my newfound reality. I had lost everything: my home, my loved ones, my purpose in life. The weight of my gift hung heavy on my shoulders, a constant reminder of the world that had been lost, a world I had failed to help.